Hi, my name is David Felix Sutcliffe. I'm one of the co-directors of Terror, and I'm here to answer a few questions about the film. The first one is, you are sort of playing on two horses with this film. Did this choice inflict any moral doubt in you? Playing on two horses. Well, I think from the beginning we had intentions of exposing exactly what takes place in these counterterrorism investigations. Lyric and I have both worked for many years as reporters investigating these types of cases, and the FBI's use of informants is something that has come up over the past few years. We've seen the FBI increasingly using informants to go into Muslim communities in America, not just to uncover terrorist cells, but really to kind of identify people who they think they could persuade and encourage to participate in a terrorist plot. So our intention here was to show how that was happening, and we, of course, absolutely wanted to get access to both sides. We thought that would be an incredible opportunity to really show how these cases work. And we asked our legal advisors, what is the best way to proceed? And right from the start, they discouraged us from contacting the target of the target of the investigation, using information from the target or from the informant, saying, that could put us in legal jeopardy. We could be accused of tampering with an investigation. And so we refrained from contacting the target, even though we knew where he lived. But at one point, Khalifa, began posting on Facebook his suspicions that he was being set up by the FBI. And at one point, he wrote a very lengthy, detailed post inviting a journalist to contact him to discuss his relationship with Saeed Sharif Torres, and he wanted to press charges. He wanted protection because he felt he was being harassed by the government and wanted to talk to journalists. And so our legal advisors said at that point that it would be perfectly legitimate for us to reach out and to communicate with him. But they discouraged us from from sharing with Khalifa that we had also been filming with Saeed. And that was probably, in a moral level, that was the most challenging part of this film, reaching out to Khalifa, someone who we knew was in a vulnerable position, someone we may not have been, particularly overwhelmingly sympathetic towards, given his views, but we also didn't think that he necessarily belonged to be arrested and accused of being a terrorist, given that a lot of what he had been posting was First Amendment protected speech. It was speech we didn't agree with, but at the same time it was speech. It wasn't action. He wasn't advocating the use of violence to kill anyone. He wasn't saying that he was going to kill anyone. So we went into this situation wanting to kind of capture his side, and felt really conflicted about not telling him and not revealing the full nature of our relationship with Saeed to Khalifa. Being in his space, being in his home, being invited in, and yet essentially lying by omission. Not telling him what we'd been doing in Pittsburgh for the past few months. So that was that definitely was a conflict for us, but it was someone that we our hands were really tied in that situation, because if we were to tell Khalifa, we could be accused of tampering with an investigation, and that could result in us being put in prison, and that was not a chance we were willing to take. So, I think that was that. The second question, I think I may have kind of stepped into that territory as well. The second question is, some would probably argue that you're obstructing an ongoing investigation with national security at stake. What is your response? As I mentioned, we consulted with lawyers from the very beginning of this project, wanting to make sure that we were protected and that we wouldn't kind of interfere and be accused of interference. And they said, do not reach out to the informant, or do not reach out to the target, and also do not tell the target about the informant. But in terms of, were we concerned that we were, jeopardizing national security? To be totally honest, no. We were pretty aware from from an early stage, just who Khalifa was, and we felt, pretty confident, especially given Saeed's, assessment from an early point, that Khalifa wasn't a legitimate threat. That this case was not going to advance to the point where, he was going to be able to make considerable amount of money for bringing about a successful conviction, or B, that Khalifa was ever considering undertaking any sort of legitimate steps towards plotting an actual attack, let alone going overseas to train to begin that process. That many other people have taken voluntarily without the use of informants, without the help of informants, or the encouragement of informants. People who are going overseas and training with ISIS. And we saw from a pretty early stage, as I said, that this was not that scenario, that Khalifa was not that motivated, was not willing to leave his wife and his child, and also didn't have the resources to go overseas. And, I think there's this perception that we've been trying to challenge, that, that the threat of terrorism is ever present and in as many communities as across America, that it's just there, because there are these cases that are reported on a pretty regular basis every other week, that the FBI has foiled yet another plot. But the reality is that many of these plots resemble very closely the events of the film that we were able to capture. Informants pressuring, encouraging, persuading, manipulating people who don't really have, one, the intelligence to recognize that they are being manipulated, or two, that they don't have the resources to undertake any of these attacks on their own, and thus are not, extreme threats to national security. And so we felt, given what we knew previously of the FBI's relationship with informants and how these were kind of used to create the impression that we are winning the war on terrorism, that we are actually finding legitimate terrorists, that impression is false. And so we weren't concerned that, this scenario was different from the ones that we had seen and read about. And, we've met family members of defendants, and we know what has been happening for the past 10, 15 years. And we realized pretty early on that this is that same scenario. In terms of the third question, having probably watched a lot of FBI, CIA movies like the rest of us, what surprised you the most about their work with informants in the process of making the film? The most shocking thing was, the incompetence that we saw. As is displayed pretty clearly in the film, the FBI, at least the ones in the agents that we were able to capture through their relationship with Saeed in Pittsburgh, they're not this kind of all-knowing big brother super spy. They're kind of clumsily stumbling along, creating ideas, making things up as they go along. And it was, just the fact that they would encourage Saeed to call Khalifa after Khalifa had, received incontrovertible evidence that Shahid Hussein, Mohammed, was actually an informant, and that Saeed was also an informant, that they would encourage him to contact him after that and say, I don't know what you heard, but it's wrong, and people are coming to my job, and shut your mouth. The kind of logic there is so, vacuous. There is no logic there, essentially. Everything was kind of being invented and improvised as they went along. So yeah, the incompetence that we witnessed, and also the fact that they never were able to connect the dots and realize that the informant that they were using was filming with a documentary crew. You would think that they would have figured that out or found that out sooner, but yet until the point when we reached out to them for comment, as far as we knew, they had no awareness of our relationship with Saeed. And that, we were very grateful, don't get me wrong, that they never uncovered what we were doing prematurely. But at the same time, it raises significant questions about what else they're missing in the meantime. The fourth question is, after making this film, what is your view of the FBI and their targeting of radical Islamists? I would say my views are, they haven't changed substantially. They are what they were when I first began making this project, except much more so, much more concentrated. I'm much more convinced of what I was initially suspicious of in the beginning of this project, which was that this is an incredibly misguided and devastatingly ineffective and harmful way of protecting Americans. That we're spending $1 trillion a year on homeland security programs, and how effective are these tactics, and how effective are the use of these resources? If this is any indication, if this offers any sort of illumination of what those other resources are being directed towards and spent on, that raises, even more concerns on my part. In the beginning, I came to this film because I had spent the previous 5 years making a film about a young woman named Adama Ba, who was a student of mine, a 16-year-old Muslim girl who was arrested by the FBI and accused of being a potential suicide bomber. And I saw the devastation that had on her and her family as a result. And I wanted to make a film that explored the kind of the cornerstone of the FBI's domestic war on terrorism. And that really is the use of informants. Although there was no necessarily informant being used in Adama's case, the subject of my first film, I also just felt that there's beyond just the targets of these cases, there's the Muslim families and the Muslim communities who are all kind of brought in and felt to feel the burden of surveillance and what are the consequences of that surveillance? What could they also be swept up in these cases without cause, without reason? And that's what kind of propelled and motivated me personally in making this film. Will you continue to address the issues of this film in your future career, or is it on to something else? For the moment, I'm switching gears to focus on a film that really explores mass incarceration. I'm co-producing a film, and it's looking at the ways that our government and different private interests have profited off of the incarceration of 2.3 million Americans. It's a 700% increase over the past 30 years, and in some ways it's an extension of America's original form of terrorism, slavery. That we are seeing huge masses of Americans who are being essentially sold into these facilities. That the private sector has been able to influence legislation and policy in such a way so that it makes certain that the sentences for defendants in cases in America are incredibly strict, and that the numbers of people who are being incarcerated has grown to this kind of untenable, unsustainable number of people. 2.3 million Americans are in jail. We have 5% of the world's population, yet 25% of the world's prisoners. So, but this is an issue that terrorism is something that I have been paying attention to for the past 10, 15 years. It's something that I think I will continue to be looking at and to be aware of, and I'm definitely open and very, very much interested in exploring this topic for a future film. But for right now, it's taking a break from that to explore this other one. But I think that's all the questions. And yeah, I wish I could be there in Copenhagen. Unfortunately, something came up and I wasn't able to make it. But I'm really grateful to all of you for coming out, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you tell your friends and family about it. All right, thank you.